Story 1. I genuinely don't know. One minute I'm fine, and the next minute my heart sinks and starts beating really fast. It's pretty draining living with anxiety like that. Story 2. Waking up, going to sleep, eating, not eating, being alone, being around other people, getting high and staying sober. Being alive. Story 3. Mostly finances and unexpected expenses, but it could be anything. Political climate, a certain tone or look someone gave me, sounds or smells. It's unpredictable. Story 4. I often feel strange sensations in my body and have no idea where they are coming from. The smallest tingle anywhere makes me worry I am having a stroke, a heart attack, or developing cancer. I subconsciously create symptoms that match whatever fear is on my mind at the time. Story 5. People discuss hard drugs. Drugs triggered my panic attacks and made me stop abusing my body shortly after experimenting. Story 6. My heart rate occasionally spikes quite high. I initially thought anxiety was the cause, but recently I believe the heart issue is physiological, and my brain starts to feel anxious when it occurs. I am currently on a beta blocker, which is helping. It still spikes, but now it stays in the 110s instead of the 130s or 140s. Story 7. I feel anxious every Sunday night about the work week starting on Monday. I can't sleep on Sundays, which sets me up for another long week feeling exhausted. Story 8. Large crowds make me feel slightly claustrophobic. When I am in a big crowd, it feels as though I cannot move freely. Story 9. People who do not mind their own business often deal with multiple problems at once. I tend to overreact to the little things so I can manage more significant challenges with grace. Story 10. Uncertainty or unpredictability in people or situations involves factors that are beyond my control, such as medical anomalies or emergencies. Story 11. The future. Moreover, thinking about it, I try to make it better, but it feels like digging through a mountain with a set of chopsticks. Whenever I have time to be alone and reflect on the future, the anxiety creeps up, starting with difficulty breathing. Story 12. Realistically, anything can trigger anxiety at any time without reason. I usually experience an anxiety attack only when I have to leave the house. Waiting in queues, being looked at by others, and having to talk to cashiers increase my discomfort. I rarely leave home, and when I do go out for exercise, I wait until it is dark outside late at night to avoid crowds. Story 13. I am anxious about experiencing panic attacks unexpectedly. It doesn't make sense and is exhausting. Story 14. Although I am not an anxious person, meetups with indefinite end times make me uncomfortable. I am fine with having coffee or walking for a couple of hours, but spending an unspecified amount of time together is my worst nightmare. I don't know why, I just cannot do it. Story 15. Somehow my selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor lately has been affecting my nights and mornings. I have been thinking about my country's future and similar concerns. Story 16. Lately it has been challenging. My partner just started a 2-year program on the other side of the country, and someone I really care about is going through a lot and has become unresponsive. These two situations are making it difficult to concentrate on work, increasing my anxiety. Story 17. Being in tight crowds really affects me. Even knowing I will face a group later in the day, especially if it is people I know and am excited to see, still makes me anxious. And then there are cockroaches. We had a significant issue with them at our last apartment, and I was a mess until we could move. Story 18. I am halfway through treatment for triple-negative breast cancer, a particularly aggressive form of breast cancer with a high recurrence rate. I have completed 2 phases of chemotherapy and am now on my last phase, which is in pill form. Thinking about my immediate future triggers anxiety because, even though I am quite stoic, this kind of cancer feels like playing Russian roulette. I have had a really challenging life and overcome many obstacles, and it's difficult to imagine that this might be the big disappointing finale. I genuinely hope not, but you understand what I mean. Story 19. Other than everything going on in Washington, D.C., the sound and feel of printed 3D items make my skin crawl. When my dad had cups with printed 3D football helmets on them, I refused to wash them with the other dishes and almost cried when I had to wash 3 of them consecutively. Story 20. Blood-related accidents, especially involving others in public, trigger an intense feeling of faintness. I find it distressing. When it happens at home involving myself, it feels more manageable. However, I believe it stems from empathy and a sense of losing control. Additionally, being intoxicated can lead to a similar feeling of losing control. Story 21. Many things involve people arguing or fighting, such as loud movies or television shows. There are also protests where individuals shout at one another. People often engage in disputes with me over unreasonable matters that don't really matter in the broader context of life. Undisciplined children and teenagers contribute to this chaos. Perhaps I'm just a cranky old Mr. Wilson. Story 22. I was involved in a serious car accident 7 years ago. I spent a month in the hospital and 3 months recovering before I was able to walk again. Every time I see an accident, flashing police or fire department lights, or am in heavy traffic, it brings back memories. Story 23. When people tap their fingers against the table or any other surface, when the bus gets too crowded, it literally makes me want to get off, along with loud noises, to name a few. Story 24. Too much caffeine. If you believe that caffeine does not affect you but feel high-strung and anxious, I have news for you. Story 25. Men yelling or sometimes just talking with raised voices or angry male voices. I could never listen to Eminem because of this. He always sounds so angry. There is also a fear of failing at something. Both are rooted in my childhood. An abusive stepfather and being told that you either do it perfectly or not at all, because if you're not perfect, then you're useless. Story 26. Projects. What if I make a mistake with my project and receive negative feedback? Every time there is a new project, I find myself focusing on negative thoughts instead of ways to motivate myself. I had a difficult experience with a recent project that affected my group's morale. Story 27. Car trouble and home repairs. I often downplay my feelings, but these two issues have thrown me into a tailspin. A friend sent me a picture of her check engine light, and I had to delete it immediately because it made me feel panicky. The thought of needing someone to come over for home repairs triggers a panic attack. Even minor issues make me feel unwell. The unfortunate part is that this anxiety is spreading to other areas of my life. Now I find myself becoming increasingly anxious about the weather, as it can lead to home damage. I am even starting to dread vacations because the long drive might result in vehicle problems. I don't consider myself someone who experiences anxiety, and I do not take any medications. Story 28. Thumps, bangs, and knocks. I often think about any illness or condition. I had an anxiety attack after thinking I had an aneurysm while watching a video about them because I wanted to learn more. I am fine with taking medicine, but if it doesn't go down smoothly or I take a bit more than needed within a certain time period, I start to feel anxious. I also feel anxious about being in public social interactions and just being a living human. Story 29. Sunday evenings bring a lingering anxiety from childhood trauma. I am 36 now, and I still feel physically unwell every Sunday starting around 5 p.m. Story 30. Multiple loud noises occurring simultaneously. Individuals who repeatedly smack their lips while talking. An overload of schoolwork. Individuals who breathe excessively loudly. Story 31. The funniest one is airplanes. I live by a small airport where there are usually just hobby or farming planes, along with an annual air show. So I get to hear them flying low quite often, and my anxiety always triggers my internal dialogue. This is it. You're done. That plane is definitely coming for your apartment. That's how you're going to die. Good job. My internal dialogue can be quite rude. Story 32. I can read people's moods and micro-expressions very well. Trauma, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and autism have shaped my life. Story 33. Anxiety is perfectly normal under stressful circumstances. Sometimes there simply is no trigger. This was me yesterday. A high heart rate and a generalized feeling of unease. I found myself snacking to ease the odd feeling, but that didn't work. I ended up feeling bloated and anxious. There was absolutely no reason for me to feel that way. I do have an earache. Perhaps I'm getting sick, and that's how it manifested. Story 34. Loud music in a crowded space. It's a shame because I would love to be able to go to concerts, but unless they are outdoors, I can't do it. Even then, I have to be way in the back. Story 35. Driving, making an appointment even if done online, waiting for an appointment, shopping, and wanting to start a new art project while also wanting to pursue another one, but being unable to decide. These situations all contribute to my anxiety. Thankfully, my anxiety isn't all-consuming, and I can usually overcome it, but everything still causes me anxiety. Story 36. I am learning a new language. Whenever I get an opportunity to speak it, my social anxiety returns. I successfully overcame that in my early 20s, but only with English. Story 37. Plans and punctuality are significant triggers for me. If I feel that I am late for an event, overbooked, or have to cancel plans, it can lead to a downward spiral. Story 38. Home ownership is often criticized, with many considering renting to be throwing away money. However, having a good landlord can make renting worthwhile by eliminating the stress of maintenance and repairs. Story 39. Being challenged for no reason by others and overthinking about things that haven't happened and probably won't. Story 40. I am in high school. I have anxiety, and it does not take much to trigger it. One thing I have always been terrified of is being shot in school, especially after hearing about various school shootings. Sometimes, when I hear loud bangs, such as things falling, I get scared. The thought of being shot, particularly in school, has always terrified me. Story 41. Social interactions, unfinished tasks, completed tasks, phone calls, university, my nicotine addiction, my lungs, my heart, my eating habits, my time spent in bed, lack of employment, my family, my cleanliness, the melting icebergs and the dying polar bears, the existence of the universe, the meaning of life, what happens when I die, and is it worth it? I could go on. Story 42. My attention deficit hyperactivity disorder unfortunately triggers my anxiety. There is so much to do, but it feels like I am frozen. I immediately feel anxious because I am not completing the tasks I need to and am falling behind, which becomes overwhelming. It's a terrible cycle. Story 43. A cacophony of screaming children, last-minute tasks, and unrealistic expectations from supervisors or family. Story 44. Honestly, a lot, but the worst thing is definitely school. I struggle with school refusal. I get very anxious and have panic attacks when I have to go to school sometimes. Occasionally, just the thought of going to school can trigger panic attacks. This has been going on for years, on and off each school year, and most of the time I don't know the cause. I've never been able to identify a real trigger. I like school and usually want to go in those situations because I don't like staying home all day. But it still happens. Story 45. Anything related to medical or health matters, such as when someone measures your blood pressure, especially for mothers dealing with preeclampsia. Story 46. Large dogs on the street or in restaurants. We need to talk. My wife is driving, making plans. My boss is keeping me out of the loop on things. It has gotten better since I quit smoking cigarettes. At least it feels a lot less sharp. It turns out that if you do something to relieve stress and then stop doing it, it can create stress that you need to relieve. Oh, how many times I thought I was stressed out when it was just nicotine withdrawal. Story 47. Weather has always been a significant trigger for me. Now, it feels like everything and everyone is triggering me. I really need a break from the news and social media. Story 48. Ambiguity makes it difficult to determine whether my feelings stem from anxiety or if it reflects reality. Story 49. Fluorescent lighting, large groups of people, unpleasant odors, being in vehicles, heights, obsessive-compulsive tendencies, and health concerns. Story 50. Sitting alone with someone is challenging for me. I can manage groups but find it difficult to be alone with individuals. Answering the phone for people I know is also difficult. However, answering or calling strangers feels easy. I don't understand why it's so hard with those I know personally. Story 51. My phone acts like a severely remedial individual in the most dire moments. This is especially infuriating when numerous thoughts, topics, and ideas fly through my head, and I try to use my phone to capture them before I forget what I just came across. Story 52. A lot, but the most anxiety-inducing thing for me is nausea. It becomes a feedback loop. The nausea makes me anxious, and the anxiety makes me nauseous. I think it's because I used to get motion sickness from my dad's driving, and he once threw me out of the car when I was sick inside it. I try very hard not to be sick now and am working to detach from past events so I can be sick in peace. Story 53. Men raising their voices in anger and swearing or throwing things, especially if they have been drinking alcohol. I grew up with an abusive father and ended up with an abusive former partner. I immediately go into fight or flight mode. Story 54. Cute, fluffy bunnies, rainbows, and women on a gay depression hotline. Yes, I dialed the wrong number once. They started talking about delicious foods to enjoy to lift the spirits. Now I'm panicking. Story 55. Change without explanation. My health insurance deductible. Long silences between one-sentence texts. The children could be in danger. Story 56. Literally anything, mainly fitness at college, always gives me bad anxiety before college when I know it's a fitness day. Trying new things also makes me anxious. Story 57. Anytime I sense that I may have offended someone or that someone is upset, I often blame myself for their feelings. I am improving in this regard, but setting boundaries remains challenging for me. Story 58. Honestly, everything. I'm not the right kind of person for society. I never really bought into hustle culture, and that makes me feel guilty. But I enjoy being at home all the time. I want a peaceful life where I can just paint, write, and read all day. To be honest, I would be better off, and I think the people around me would be too. Surviving nowadays almost exclusively requires the acquisition of money, which takes up a lot of your time and, in many cases, leaves little for anything else. I could theoretically live off the grid, but I'm not healthy enough, and how would I get my paints? Painting is everything to me, and living off the grid is far more difficult than people think. Running water is amazing. I like my current job, but it's part-time, and I know I can't do this forever. Full-time workers aren't treated very well, don't make a lot, and moving up to management, which offers more livable wages but only slightly, requires relocating at the corporation's whim. This could mean long commutes every day. Commuting is awful, and I don't think there's any way around it. I dread the thought of doing that for the rest of my life. My family and even my therapist don't support my desire to work from home for some reason, even though I feel like that would be so beneficial for me and alleviate a lot of stress. On top of that, I'm required to visit family once a year, and flying with the potential to endure a crying child just freaks me out. I hate traveling. I want a very small life. I know that once I go full-time, I'll have to use all my vacation time on that instead of a staycation where I can just stay at home and paint. I just want to be an artist. And I don't mean constantly hustling and trying to sell. I want to create in peace. That's all I want. But everyone expects me to be this great person, and I know I let everyone down. I know I'm not good enough. Not for my friends, who are all moving on to bigger and better jobs. Not for my family, and definitely not for society. I consider myself white trash and the American equivalent of the Dalit or untouchable. Story 59. Finances, thinking about my future, the stability of my current job, the need to search for new work, and working on creative projects. Life. Story 60. Ruminating on negative experiences that have occurred or could occur and considering the many ways I would address them is a bad habit. I need it to be quiet here. Story 61. Having my blood pressure taken by the machine rather than manually. I always have high blood pressure on the machine and normal when taken manually. Story 62. People with inflated egos can be difficult to understand. Those with a skewed self-image may react strongly if you inadvertently do something that reveals how you perceive them differently than they see themselves. For some individuals, trying to avoid triggering a reaction from them is like walking a tightrope. Story 63. Crowds in small spaces, unless it's a restaurant where I know I will be seated at my table momentarily, are manageable. However, elevators filled with loud people who are coughing are challenging. Dirty dishes soaking in their own stagnant water are particularly unappealing. The thought of picking up a dish and feeling something hit my hand, like a piece of wet food, is overwhelming. The worst experience is when I expect my drink to be smooth, but something with texture unexpectedly gets in. That sensation is unbearable. Story 64. Watching the news media, I check my bank balance and credit score. I think about the kind of world my child has inherited, feeling a sense of guilt during the drive home after spending time with my elderly parents. Sunday evenings before work bring these thoughts to the forefront. Story 65. Navigating a grocery store, especially when busy, with a shopping cart can be challenging. If I can't carry everything or fit it in a basket, I convince myself that I don't need it. Story 66. Being late to anything affects me significantly. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism spectrum disorder. If I think I will be late, I can have a meltdown. The reason is that my bus driver during my sophomore year and the second semester of my junior year would leave without me if I was 1 minute late. Story 67. Public speaking, particularly the rounds of introductions at the beginning of meetings, is a nightmare for me. Story 68. Arriving at appointments at unfamiliar places, I often have to ring a door buzzer or introduce myself. Story 69. Let me see. Right now, it's my tinnitus. Usually, it's a dull whine, but lately, it's similar to a high-pitched engine sound. When it happens, I start thinking of the probable causes, such as guns, machinery, inadequate ear protection, and high winds, along with the events associated with them. Kids, protect your ears. They are the only ones you have. Story 70. Tasks are always demanding. Chasing chores from morning to night is exhausting. When I am constantly on the move and still cannot keep up, my anxiety increases. Story 71. It's hard to say. One moment I feel all right, and then the next I feel anxious. I believe the trauma from losing my mom to cancer has made it worse, and I think it will always be like this. Story 72. Confrontation normally triggers me. I think it's rooted in childhood trauma, honestly. 9 out of 10 times I am able to work through it, though, because of the responsibilities of adulthood. Story 73. My husband's sister-in-law and my side of the family are toxic. I have had to cut them all off because they are detrimental to my mental health. My husband's sister-in-law is the same. She thinks she knows it all. We have argued on many occasions, and she has always blamed me for things I never did. Story 74. Not much anymore, for a few reasons. I control my anxiety. There is no one in my head but me, and 99% of the stories I create about things that can or will go wrong never happen. No amount of anxiety can control the future. I can have zero anxiety, and the outcome remains the same. I am not all-knowing. I will never understand all the factors making up a situation. Everything is exactly as it should be. The universe is older and wiser than I am. Sometimes good wins and sometimes bad wins, but you cannot have one without the other. The general trend of humanity is toward making things better. Life would be boring without conflict. I have to be uncomfortable to grow. I stay informed, but I engage with the community and influence what I can control. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.